Hi, everybody. I decided to be a wise old turtle today. Mouth doesn't work that good, but I sure do look wise. I have little spectacles too. Oh, look at that. I feel even smarter than usual by being a spectacled turtle. Anyway, I hope you folks are doing well. Today is the last class, and you're all supposed to go yay. If this were a live class, you'd be going yay, and I'd act hurt, but that's okay. I can handle these things. Yeah, so it's been quite a quarter. I think we got through it okay. It would be wonderful to meet you folks. So if you do see me on campus or you're walking through the psychology building and my door's open, stop by and say, Rosenblum, I'm one of those crazy students from when you took when you did the online course in the fall, and I'll be really happy to meet you in person. So hopefully that will be this fall. Hopefully. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the upcoming exam, and then we'll continue on today's material. Nothing new here. You already have seen all this stuff. Hold on just a second. All right. So it can be taken anytime, any 80-minute period between 12 a.m. Monday, so early Monday morning if you want to wake up. And then it needs to be completed by midnight Thursday. So it gives you 4 full days to do it. That shouldn't be a problem. Same deal as before. It's open book, but you do need to study. I'm sure by now you already know that. You can't just look up every question as it comes in. So do a good job studying. It'd probably be somewhere between 45 and 50, maybe a few more than 50 questions. Hopefully, we'll be able to derive that many questions. It will cover all lecture material since the last exam, and that's going to include faces. There was a little piece of faces that was covered on the second exam, just the uncanny valley stuff pretty much. Everything else having to do with faces will be covered on the third exam next week. Includes imitation, audiovisual speech, which I'll finish up today, and then hopefully I will get to a little multisensory perception today. There's some really cool stuff. I'm going to try to go a little faster today, but the lecture being recorded hopefully will allow that. We only have one discussion section that we'll actually be drawing from, but there was a lot of material in that, and that was the discussion section you had last Monday or Friday, the Friday before, depending on when your class was. And so make sure you look at your notes for that. And then the book chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11, and plus do look through the little afterword, the little piece at the very end. It's just a couple of pages, but it's we could certainly draw from that too for exam questions. I believe the TAs have talked to you about how they're going to do this review. I know whatever it is, they're going to make it available to everybody. So if they are doing something this Friday with a review session, that will be recorded and will be absolutely available to everybody. No problem. Okay, I see there's a couple of questions there just to anticipate. This is not a cumulative exam. It doesn't test from anything before. The second exam, or it's nothing since we completed the second exam. So it's just this new material. But let's see what your questions are. Okie dokie, where are those? All right. I look like Mitch McConnell. Thank you, Ted. That's very funny. Alicio says Master Oogway monkey. Okay, I'm not quite sure of that reference, but maybe it's the turtle thing. I don't know. I love the way Roya says that my natural movements translate into the turtle. Cool. I might be an old wise turtle, but I'm funky. All right, and let's see. That's it. Okay. Any questions? Keep the turtle through the rest of the class. I think it's going to be hard to get some information if I do that, sadly. But I will be a turtle sometime over the next weekend, I promise. All right. Any questions about the exam? Terrific. Oh, Vivian clarifies. I look like is this taken from Master Oogway and Kung Fu Panda? Okay, that's cool. That's very cool. Thank you for letting me know that. I remember we watched that with my kids when they were younger. It's very cute. Okay, terrific. Then let's de-turtle myself here. And we will There we are. It's the last class, so I thought I'd be dramatic. I'm speaking from the center of the universe. Okay. So we are going to have to go a tiny bit faster today. It's just that there's a lot of material. I was completely aware, as I've experienced the other times we've taught during quarantine, that I'm not able to cover as much material as I normally am. It's just because of the Zoom and all that stuff. That's fine. You folks ask such wonderful questions. I don't mind I don't mind us slowing down a little bit, but I'll try to get as much through as much today as I can. Okay, let's do this. So I'm going to talk a little faster. All right. So we are talking about multisensory speech perception as one of our examples of multisensory perception. And we started off by talking about this really cool example having to do with Susan Thomas, this person that was hired to lip read for the FBI. And I mean, as I said, when I interviewed her, it was just phenomenal how smooth the conversation was. She has no residual hearing whatsoever. She is completely deaf, but she just looked at my face and was able to understand everything I said. Not all deaf individuals are that good, but many are good. Many are very good. We find that there are certain things that make some people better than other people. But what I'd like to talk about today is not kind of like the kind of superheroes of lip reading, but the fact that this is something we actually all do to some degree. And you might have noticed yourself recently relying more on visual speech or realizing that you rely more on visual speech or lip reading than you thought you might, right? So one of the few silver linings of the quarantine and the pandemic is this. And I'm amazed at how many people have said this to me, that they have never been more aware of how much they use the face to understand speech perception. And what you're seeing here is a mask that was designed, in fact, for people to more easily follow the face, to more easily use visual information from the face to help their speech. I think it's fogging up. Oh, you can see a little bit here. Yeah, so they sell a number of different versions of these. Maybe you've seen these online, but some work better than others. Of course, the plastic visors work well for that, for getting information from the face. It's something that I think we've all been very, very much aware of. It is harder to understand people when you can't see their face, especially like if you're in a grocery store or someplace like that. And this is something that, people who do research like I do have known for a long time, but it's interesting now that the general public is made aware of it. Sad that we had a pandemic to kind of make people realize it, but it's interesting that people are now realizing it. Because what we've known is for a long time, we've known that people use facial information to help them understand speech in noisy environments. Maybe you've noticed yourself looking at people's faces when there's a lot of background noise, say at a party or in a loud restaurant. We know that if people have heavy accents, that it helps for the perceiver, for the listener to look at their face. They're able to understand the accent more easily. Or even if it's a quiet place and there's no accent in the speaker, if the person is saying things that are complicated and saying them somewhat quickly, like I may be doing today, it does help to look at the face of the talker. And it's not just because of attention, right? You can say, well, it helps you attend more kind of directly to one person in a room or something like that. Because we know that if in fact, someone is wearing a mask, that it doesn't help as much. Seeing the lower half of the face absolutely helps you understand what somebody is saying. And this has been shown anecdotally, as we say, in restaurants and that sort of thing, but also in real research that's been designed to do this. And the other things we know is that it's really, really important in context of language acquisition. And that's true of infants learning their first language. And it's also true of individuals who are adults, maybe learning a second language. These days, typically when there's a language course online, it will not just involve listening over headphones to somebody say a language, but actually watching somebody say the language, the new language that you're learning. And that's because research shows it absolutely helps you understand the language, especially the kind of sounds of the language more, by being able to see the lower half of the face. Now, I think one of the most compelling examples of this actually comes from language acquisition with regard to first language acquisition, where, of course, there are some infants that don't have access to visual information about speech, and that is, of course, blind infants. And so what happens with blind infants? Well, we talked a little bit about, individuals who are blind from birth, and we know that their hearing is often good, and it can become in some ways more sensitive to certain things, so their hearing can be fine. But blind infants, even with great hearing, do show subtle language delays. It takes them a little longer to kind of make certain distinctions, being able to hear certain distinctions in their own native language. But the thing about that is, that delay is very, very specific. It's specific to distinctions in, say, vowels and consonants that are auditorily, acoustically very similar, but that look very different. So the great example here is the difference between ma and na, or m's and n's. If you were to look at the sound wave for that, you would see they're actually very similar sounds. I mean, they are different, so they're different enough that, we can hear the difference between moon and noon on the telephone, but it can be tough. There'll be a lot of background noise. That's a hard thing to discriminate. But even though they are acoustically very similar, they are visually very different. Ma, na, moon, noon. And most of us, as we're learning language as infants, we can look at our parents' faces saying these different sorts of consonants to us, moon, noon. And by seeing their face articulate, we can better learn to kind of pick out the subtle sound distinctions between M and N. But for a blind kid, they don't have that sort of ability. So because, they don't have access to this very, kind of striking visual difference between M and N, it takes them a little longer to learn to hear the difference between M and N. And so they do have little language delays, blind infants, but it's completely predicted by the fact they don't have access to seeing a face articulate that helps them, in normal cases, understand the very subtle sound differences. It's really interesting. So that's a compelling, I think, argument that we all kind of rely on seeing a face at times to understand speech. And there's another compelling example, which you may have experienced yourself. It is an example called the McGurk effect. And what I'm going to do is show it to you now. Now, I should mention, if I had all the time in the world, I'd show you two versions. I'd show you the version I think is the best version of it. Then I'd show you a version of me demonstrating it on a beach, which maybe you've seen before. It's gotten, I think, 4 million hits or something like that. Don't ask about what it's like to be an internet sensation. You don't want to know. It's ugly. Anyway, I'm going to show you a better version of it. And this is how it's going to work. I'm going to show you this face up on the top half of the screen. You're seeing just the lips and the nose and the chin. And you're going to see this person's face articulate different syllables, like ba, da, 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 that sort of stuff. Very simple syllables. And I want you to watch the face and tell me, after you're done watching the face, I think there's 4 syllables. After you're done watching the face, what syllables you've heard. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. And by the way, you don't have to type it in the chat. Just kind of think of it to yourself. Oh, I might have to restart this. Hold on a second. Let's see if it works.
Ba. Ba. Ba.
Ba. Just quickly let me know. Could you guys actually get sound from that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Great. Okay, let me do it again. And again, just watch the lips and listen to the sounds and tell me what you hear. And I realize the video isn't great. It's stalled and on some people's computers and stuff like that. But hopefully at least a little of this effect will work. We'll see it again now.
ba, 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 ba.
Okay. Most people, they say when they see this, they see a good video version of it, they'll say they heard things like ba, va, va, da, that sort of thing. Hopefully, at least you got some of those, right? I realize it's kind of a staggered video, so it might not work that well. But what I'd like to do now is just play it again for you, and then I want you to listen to what it sounds like if you're not looking at the face. So close your eyes or look away and tell me what you hear. It's the exact same video clip. I'm just playing the same thing over and over again, but this time you're not going to look at the face.
Ba, 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 ba.
And hopefully, if this worked, you actually heard what was on the audio channel of that tape, which was the exact same syllable over and over again. Hopefully this worked okay. If not, go ahead and look at the one of me on the beach. If you just look up McGurk effect in YouTube, ta-da, it's Rosenblum. Okay, that version's good and it will be smoother for you. But hopefully some of you still got this effect here, where while you were looking at the face, you heard different syllables than if you weren't looking at the face. And that is the McGurk effect, named after the person who first discovered this, which is pretty amazing. If it worked on you, and hopefully it worked on at least some of you, hopefully it worked on a majority of you, you have a very interesting experience here. Yeah, no, let me just do it one more time. So after you closed your eyes, you heard different things. Now that you know what the effect is about, open your eyes again and see if you still are influenced by what you see.
Ba, ba,
Yeah.
ba, ba.
So here's what people typically report. First of all, it doesn't matter now that you know how the effect works. It's one of those illusions that even if you know how it's created, you know, that we took a ba, ba, ba over and over again and kind of matched it to a face articulating different syllables, okay? It doesn't matter if you know that. The effect still works. And the other thing I think that people often report is like, it's not like I'm seeing one thing and hearing something else. I have the experience of hearing what I'm looking at, which is kind of a strange way to say something, right? The visual speech information, the visual information I'm getting from a person talking is making me hear something different, right? Which is really interesting. And this is the McGurk effect. So we're going to talk about some of the kind of details of this in just a second, but at this point I wanted to tell you something really interesting, and I think I might have maybe mentioned this at the very beginning of the quarter, that this is kind of going to tell us something about how the brain deals with multisensory information. Because again, remember we talked about the different areas of the brain having different sorts of I guess specialties, where back here it's called the occipital lobe, and that's typically thought to be involved with your eyes. Here is the temporal lobe, and here's where hearing is processed typically. But here we have a case. In fact, the first case that was ever reported for human subjects, where what somebody is seeing directly affects the part of their brain that's responsible for hearing. So it's a cross-sensory sort of influence, right? And we've been talking about these sort of cross-sensory plasticity, cross-sensory compensation throughout the quarter. But here's a situation where what somebody is seeing right now has an effect on their auditory brain. Okay. And in fact, there doesn't even need to be sound available. You can just ask people to look at a face and try to lip read what syllables the person might be articulating. And you could imagine, I know we're not great at lip reading, but you could imagine doing that. And what will happen as they're trying to guess what it is? That looks like a ba, maybe that's a da, ba, except they're doing this silently to themselves. What's happening is, in fact, the parts of their brain that are responsible for sound processing are lighting up. So it's just this really terrific and actually, I think, initial example of showing that in the human brain, it's not kind of divided up into the seeing part and the hearing part and the touching part. each of these parts maybe spend a little bit more time with seeing and a little bit more time with hearing, but they can all be directly influenced by other sorts of sensory input. And this is something that's pretty new. We didn't know about this until about 15 years ago. And now we're realizing that the brain is really designed for dealing with multisensory input, and dividing it up based on the eyes are here, the ears are here, that sort of stuff probably isn't correct. And that's kind of revolutionary for a lot of us. So what's going on? Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the McGurk effect here. First of all, I'll tell you that it works with folks from all language backgrounds. It's ever been tested. And so, you know, depending on your native language, some syllables work better than other syllables, but for anybody from any language background, it will be the case that you can induce some type of McGurk effect where a syllable you are seeing affects the syllable you are hearing. You know, it's going to be different for, you know, Japanese native speakers versus English native speakers, but there will be some syllables, some consonants that it will work for across those. We did an experiment a long time ago, before you were born, on testing this with pre-linguistic infants in I think this paper got published in 1997. I won't go into the details. You can read the book. The book has a really kind of fun description of what it's like to run infants in these sort of experiments. And you'll see it's a kind of cute sort of experience, and you'll see the sort of design we use to work. But it suggests that as early as they can be tested, infants seem to be able to integrate the audio and visual information in the same way adults do, which is kind of an interesting finding. The sort of visual influences you find are much kind of broader than this. So we know that people can get things that we didn't used to think were available on a face. So remember we talked about intonation before, you know, where my voice goes really high and then goes really low, or maybe for a question I end up raising my voice at the end. And for a statement, I don't do that. I kind of, you know, have it decline till it stops at the end. That's intonation. And that would seem like something that would be kind of coming from the sound, and it does. But it's also, as it turns out, available on the face. Lots of other things as well. You can look at a face speaking silently and know whether somebody has an accent. You can, to some degree, okay, at better than chance levels, determine what that accent is just by watching a face. Okay, again, you're not hearing the sound, the sound's been taken out of the videotape, right? But you can do that. Tone just means, I don't know if you're familiar with there's certain languages that have distinctions in the language that are based on tone. Mandarin is one of them. And we never thought that would be information available on a face, but it absolutely is. Don't worry about pressure. I just wanted to tell you that there's a lot more information now we realize that's available on the face than ever before. And I also want to talk a little bit about how automatic this sort of integration is of hearing and seeing. And I'm going to do it by giving you an example that we studied a long time ago in my lab. And here's how it works. We did see things like this before. We saw these kind of point light actors. Remember I talked about them when we were discussing imitation and imitative learning, where we put points on the you know, major joints of the body and kind of show these points moving. Here's points again. And what we do, and I'm going to just be a little kind of sneaky here, is we bring subjects in and ask them to look at those points there and just ask them to tell us what they think it is. And they'll do that. They'll say, I don't know, it looks like I don't know, a constellation of stars, a butterfly. I don't know, it looks like it's some sort of, you know, some sort of organization, but I'm not sure. It's just too little information. And then what we'll do is we will show it to them moving. Now, I bet you folks know what this is, of course, right? But our subjects who were naive at this point said, I don't know, is it a butterfly moving? Is it a, I don't know, the constellation of stars I saw before? It's now kind of shifting into a new galaxy, kind of like my cool background today, right? Some people did say, I think it's a face. I do think it's a face and it looks like it's saying something, but not everybody. Okay, that was the second part of the experiment. Now here comes the third part of the experiment. What we did which you say, okay, don't worry about what that is, but what we're going to do is we're going to continue to show it to you. And we're going to play syllables along with it. And we want you to tell us what syllables you hear, okay? So keep looking at the face, but listen for the syllables and tell us what syllables you hear. And let's go ahead and do that. Oops. Okay, put the sound back on.
Ba.
Yeah.
Ba. 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 Ba.
Okay, so I bet this is not going to work with you because of the quality of the kind of temporal quality, the time quality of the video is probably not going to be great enough for you guys to do it. But here's what happened. When we showed this on a nice big screen in front of them and the video was great quality and they listened to these syllables, many people, about 2/3 of them said that it was a va much of the time, va. Probably a lot of you heard it as a ba, which it actually is. It actually, on the auditory channel, it is ba. But you might know you're seeing a face that's been kind of rendered with these points as articulating a va, so we have a McGurk effect. In this case, it's not auditory ba plus visual ga creating a da. It would be auditory ba plus visual va giving the percept of a va. So a lot of people, at least I think pretty much everybody, about half the time did say it was a va. It's not as strong a McGurk effect as when we have the full face, but a lot of people did report hearing va, which is a McGurk effect. It is a visual influence, okay? So they finished that. And then we asked them to now tell us what it was. What did you look at? What was that image all about? And they said, okay, I think it was a face and it was articulating something along with the syllables. About 2/3 of people said that and they were absolutely correct. But 1/3 of the subjects that we tested still said, I don't know, still looks like a butterfly to me. Still looks like this kind of undulating constellation of stars or maybe splattered milk on a black background or something that was then animated to move, but that's all I saw. And we wondered, we were first very surprised that people weren't able to figure it out at this point, but we wondered whether those people who never saw it as a face still showed the McGurk effect. And the answer is yes, they did. So the point here is that even subjects who don't know they are looking at a face, don't consciously know they're looking at a face, still show facial information integrating with what they are hearing to the point that it overrides it. The McGurk effect works even without being consciously aware that one is looking at a face, which is really cool. I mean, that's one of the very surprising instances of this, I think. What else? Well, you might remember we did kind of talk about a McGurk effect before when we were discussing touch and Helen Keller and Rick Joy when we were discussing Tadoma. Okay, remember these folks, right? And I did say that, yeah, it takes a long time to do what they were able to do, which is to, to really understand, detailed speech by touching a face. But I also said that there are instances where naive people can do this to some degree. And you can imagine, I think maybe if you tried this at home and, you can try it now if you haven't, do this sort of thing and make a va and a ba and a da, va, ba, da. And you can imagine that right off the bat, if you came in, put on a glove and touched somebody's face, creating those syllables, yeah, you could do that. I mean, it's not, natural, doesn't seem normal to you, but yeah, you can distinguish those syllables. Great. Glad you can distinguish those syllables, because now what we're going to do is we're going to put these headphones on you and you're going to feel this person articulating syllables. And at the same time, it's going to be synchronized with you hearing syllables, and tell us what syllables you hear. And they'll feel somebody articulating silently while they're hearing ba. And guess what they believe they're hearing? They believe they're hearing va. So you can get a McGurk effect. You can get this crazy McGurk effect, not just from seeing a face, but from touching a face. You get these sort of influences, which is really weird if you think about it, because how many of us have ever touched a face for the purposes of perceiving speech before? Before you took this class, you didn't even know it existed, I bet, most of you, right? And so our subjects come in and they say, I have no idea why I'm doing this. This is a really unnatural thing. I've never done this before. But even with no experience, they feel the face, they hear the syllables. The integration happens the same way, which is crazy. It suggests that this integration that occurs isn't really very much, it's not dependent on an experience of associating touching and hearing, right? You know, you haven't done this before. It seems like it's something kind of deeper. It wasn't based on your kind of, you know, experience doing these two things before. It happens right away the first time you ever try it, which is pretty cool. It suggests something really kind of deep about how the speech parts of your brain integrate the senses. And there's other examples of these too. You know, I kind of wish I hadn't used this term. It's kinesthetic, and what it means, really, this is the term that we could have used when we were talking about you know, the muscle tendon systems. And this is particularly as it's relevant to feeling one's own position of the limbs, or of, in this case, the face, right? So, you know, when you put your arm out like this, you know where it is, not only because you commanded it to, you know, be in different positions. The same thing could happen if you came up here and put my arm in different positions. I would absolutely know where it is because of this information in the muscles and tendons, which is sometimes called kinesthetic information, okay? We also get kinesthetic information from the face, you know, where our lips are positioned, where our tongue is positioned. And what you can do, if you want to try this, is, it's going to sound weird, McGurk yourself. What does that mean? You can listen, okay? Actually, you could try this with the recording that has me on the beach, because in that recording, you're going to hear me saying ba, ba, ba over and over again. If you want, close your eyes and it will sound like a ba, but then as you're hearing the ba over and over again, do this silently. And what's going to happen is that ba is going to start sounding like a va, even though, you know, you're not actually hearing a va coming from your lips. Okay, that's what's meant by kind of a kinesthetic sort of an influence. Again, it's kind of just demonstrating, you know, kind of how open the brain seems to be when it comes to influences over what we hear. It's not just sound that determines it. It is light, it is seeing a face articulate, it is touching a face with our hand, and it's even feeling what our own face is doing that affects how we hear speech. Pretty cool. The other example here, I'll just give it very quickly. This is an example where people are hearing, in this case, it's going to be vowels, E's versus A's. But as they're listening to it, these syllables are synchronized with this little set of robot arms that pulls the face apart or pulls the lips up. And that pulling, okay, not kind of a self-initiated moving of the lips like I just mentioned, but this is now, you know, the lips being moved by something else. That will also affect how you hear things, okay? So all these crazy examples are really showing the brain is very open to lots of different influences, touch, sight, you know, different types of touch like this when it comes to deciphering sound, okay? So what the brain is detecting, so yeah, I guess I forgot to put this down. Cross-modal experience is not necessary for these effects to work. In the Tadoma effect, like this one, in the effect making yourself, McGurking yourself while you silently articulate and listen to syllables, or in this example, it's going to happen right away, pretty much, right? And it suggests that you don't need experience, you know, kind of matching these things up over your life when it comes to having an effect, which is really cool. So let's go back to the brain. Remember, we're talking in all these examples about a part of the brain that we thought was just responsible for the sound. And this is a very small part here that's responsible for speech perception in particular. And what we're saying is that what the brain is after, what this little piece of the brain is after, is not just sound. It's after knowing what a talker is doing with their speech articulators. It's after understanding what type of movements a talker is making as they create speech, okay? And in a very important sense, in a very important way, it doesn't care about how it's getting that information when it comes to senses. It doesn't care. I mean, it's near the auditory, it's near the rest of the auditory brain. So yeah, it wants to get sound for speech, but if it doesn't, it's got other ways of getting it. It gets it through lip reading. It gets it through tadoma. It can get it through having your own face influenced like this. And certainly, yes, it's preferring auditory speech, but all these other things can influence it immediately without experience, suggesting that that part of the brain doesn't really care about sensory modality very much at all. It cares much more about what a talker is doing with their articulators as they're speaking, and is willing and able to get that information through many sensory modalities. And that's a really nice lesson as we're going to go in very soon and talking about sensory integration outside of speech, but we're going to remind ourselves of this one. This is a really great example of how, while we used to think of the brain, kind of being devoted to individual senses, now we're seeing that the brain is much more kind of open to having different senses affected in different parts of the brain. It's much more flexible when it comes to that sort of thing. Okay, let's take a little break, see if there's any questions, and do a polling question. Okay. Ba. I heard ba. Okay, a lot of people heard ba. Some people heard va. Some people heard da. Thank you, Batul. Again, go ahead, watch the silly video of me if you haven't watched it before. I think that listen, I would not have put me on the beach, and I would not have had the camera so close up to my mouth. That had to do with the BBC. But I did actually tell them the best way to demonstrate the effect, and I think it's a very compelling version. I don't want to show it to you because I'm so sick of seeing it. So go ahead, look on for the McGurk effect. And if you really want to experience it, it works really well. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's do a polling question. And I think I have one right here about the McGurk effect. I sure. Oh, let's do one. Yeah, actually, we'll do that one second. Let's do good lip readers first. I don't think we've talked about this yet. We didn't do this one before, right? No. Okay, so here's the question about good lip readers. Which of the following is instrumental in making somebody a good lip reader? A, being deaf. B, using lip reading as a primary means of communication. C, being female. Or D, all of the above. This will be a question on the third exam next week. You can look back at your notes or the slides and you'll see the answers right there. Okay, doing great. I'll give you another 10 seconds and then we'll take a look at it. Okay. 54% of you got the correct answer, which is all of the above. So D is the correct answer. We do know that deaf individuals are better at lip reading than probably, I guess I'd say twice as good at lip reading overall, which is true. And lip readers who use it as their deaf individuals who at least initially use it as their primary means of communication are also very good. Even if if they are signers largely, they are going to still be that, and signing is their primary means. They still are going to be better lip readers than hearing individuals. And then being female, it is absolutely true. Remember, and you can always remember this because I said last week when we were discussing this, women are better at a lot of perceptual and cognitive skills than men are. And this is one of them. Women tend to be better lip readers than men for whatever reason. I don't think that's ever been established, but they also, they have things like, sometimes better long-term memory, short-term storage and long-term memories and all this other great stuff. So it could be correlated with that. But being female does help. And Susan Thomas was all of these things. So there we go. So that will be a question on your exam next week. All right, terrific. let's continue now and go back to talking about lip reading. And we're actually going to switch a tiny bit because actually I really love to give this, I like to tell this story usually in class, but I've got to cut it out today. If you get a chance though, well, if you get a chance, you should, in the book, you'll see there is a discussion, there's an interview with the director of the movie Bolt. I bet you guys have seen Bolt. Remember that old Pixar movie about the dog who's an actor but actually thinks he's the character? I had a nice, Chris Williams is the director's name, and we had a great talk about how he made the decision to cast the different voice actors for the film based on the look of the character. So you might know John Travolta is the voice of Bolt. His owner, I can't remember the name of the gal, is Miley Cyrus. It's a fun story to learn about how voice actors are cast for films. And the reason I wanted to talk to him is because of some things that had been recently observed about talkers and how they are actually related to their visual appearance. And this is stuff we've tested in my lab, but a number of other labs have tested this in much more depth in our lab. I should mention that. I always like to put Mike Tyson up here. And he was recently in the news. He's boxing again. Okay. All right. And the reason I put Mike Tyson up here when it comes to matching voices and faces is I think he's the great example of a voice that doesn't match his appearance, right? Yeah, Mike kind of talks like this, right? Don't tell him I said this. Please don't tell him I said this. But he kind of has this kind of almost mousy voice like this. And he's got this really imposing visible appearance, you know, it kind of doesn't match. And I love examples like this. People sometimes give me ideas of folks like this. So do you know who Fran Drescher is? I'm not sure, your parents probably do. She was an actress on an old show called The Nanny, and she's a really strikingly beautiful woman, but she's got this kind of voice like this. And it's, you know, kind of part of her charm. And it's another example where a voice doesn't match a face. And I think we're aware, these are very conspicuous examples. And maybe you've noticed this through podcasts. I think that's probably the most common thing these days, is you're listening to a podcast for a while and you're really enjoying it. And then, you know, you go online to learn more about the podcast, and then you see a picture of the person who narrates the podcast, you know, and it seems kind of, oh, I didn't think they would look like that. Right? I think we've had this sort of experience. So we think, oh, that must be another example where voices don't necessarily match faces. However, research suggests otherwise, because people can make these matches. And we did a little of this, and some other labs have done this sort of thing, where you do something like you play a voice of a person saying the word tennis, and then you see two faces saying that same word, okay? Tennis, tennis, right? You know, they're from different recordings than from the audio recording is, a different utterance. And the question is, can you match that voice to the two faces? You hear a female voice say tennis, you see two female voices, can you make the match? And it just turns out people are pretty good at it. And it kind of is deeper than that, because you can do this. Subjects can hear a voice say tennis, and then see two female faces saying a different word, like, I don't know, flower or something like that. So you hear tennis, and then you see two faces silently articulating the word flower. And you can make that match as well. I say, I think that voice came from that face, and you're better at chance. So you can do this over utterances, meaning, you know, different times a person is saying tennis, you know, where you're matching tennis, or over speech material. What I mean by speech material here is this example where you hear a word tennis, and then you see a person articulating silently flower and the other person articulating silently flower. It's different. We call that different speech material. You can still make those matches. And you can even make those matches if you didn't know English. Same words, right? You hear tennis, you have no idea what it means. You don't know any English, and you see flower and flower. You can still make the match even if it's an unknown language. Okay, so certainly, you know, the striking examples of Mike Tyson and Fran Drescher and that podcast example I gave you, you know, we're very aware of. But you know, for most people, we're able to make that match. How do we do that? And if you've read the attractiveness stuff, the multisensory attractiveness stuff in the book, and I think I can't remember. I think maybe your TAs did talk a little bit about that this last week. You might know that there is a correlation between attractive faces and attractive voices, and also attractive smells and attractive bodies and all that sort of stuff, which are really interesting. But maybe people are doing it that way. You hear a female voice tennis, and it's an attractive voice, and then you see two faces, and flower and flower speaking silently. You don't hear anything. You're just seeing flower like that. Maybe you say, well, it's an attractive voice. I say I go for the more attractive face, whatever that means here, okay? So it could be that. It could be, you know, the age. Well, it sounds like a young person saying tennis, and I think that this person on the left looks younger than the person on the right. Maybe people are making the matches that way. Size. So if it's if it's men and it's a low voice, then it could be that the person who looks bigger articulating in the two images could be the one that owns that voice. It could be that thing, right? However, it might be that partly, but guess what? You can make these matches even when all that stuff is taken away from a face. And how do you do that? How do you take away age information and size information and attractiveness information? Well, what you do is you use something like the point light speech, the points that are moving on the face like you saw before. So you can isolate the speech. And not only can you isolate the speech with the point lights, which we'll talk about in a second. Here, I'll put this up here, point lights. So that's exactly what we saw. But you also can isolate speech and get rid of age information and size information and attractiveness information using this kind of weird synthesis technique. This is what the speech sounds like. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this fine. It's going to sound like R2-D2 kind of, but I think you're going to be able to tell there's a sentence in there.
Where were you a year ago?
Assuming you could hear that. I'll do it again.
Please say what this word is.
Two different sentences. Let me do the first one again.
Please say what this word is.
I'm clicking on that first thing.
Where were you a year ago?
Again.
Where were you a year ago?
I think most of you probably could decipher that sentence. You are hearing this, right? Hold on, let me just make sure. Yeah, you got it. Good. People are actually writing down their answers. That's wonderful. And then what's this one?
Please say what this word is.
Yeah. Again, one more time, just for fun.
Please say what this word is.
Okay, so here's the deal with this. And actually, don't worry about this graph. But basically, if you know anything about how sound is printed out, you're hearing three whistles kind of changing their pitch at the same time. And I won't get into the technical details about this, but I can tell you interesting things about this sort of sound. It's called sine wave speech because sine waves are kind of pure tones. That's what sine wave means here. But I don't care if you know that. What I care about is this is speech that doesn't really have age information and doesn't really have size information or attractiveness. It's like kind of the auditory version of point light speech down here, okay? And here's the thing. People can make these matches going between sine wave speech and point light speech. Before I do that, let me just show you the experiment that we did. And what you're going to see here is that you're not going to hear sine wave voices. You're going to hear a person's natural voice, and then I'm going to show you 2-point light images. And I'm going to ask you which of the 2-point light images is of the face of the person's voice you just heard. Here you go.
The football game is over.
Natural voice. Is it this speaker? Or that speaker? Let me do it again. So you hear the voice and you're going to be showing two different people talking, saying that same sentence. And the question is, in point light, obviously, we've gotten rid of the age and the size and attractiveness information. And it's like this.
The football game is over.
So what do you think? Was it the first person or second person? Okay, I can't hear you anyway, but yeah, it turns out it was the first person, I think, in this case. Now, people aren't perfect with this, but they are better than chance when they go through this. They can, they think they're guessing, they think they have no idea what they're doing, but after a while, they end up getting a little bit more confident and they end up getting pretty accurate. But not only can they do it with that natural voice, you can imagine how crazy this experiment might seem if you sat down in it. First, you hear something like this, right?
Please say what this word is. Please say what this word
And
is.
then you see these points moving that you are told is somebody saying the same sentence and are asked to make matches. Okay, based on who you think this person might be, do they match this person better and this person better? And they can do it. And so that's what I mean by isolated speech here. What subjects seem to be doing is kind of picking out the idiosyncratic, the subject's specific style of articulating it. How they kind of pull together their consonants and vowels is different from another person. We all have different ways of speaking. And what seems to occur here is that information, that idiosyncratic way we articulate vowels and consonants, is something that's available in these sine wave sounds, and there's something that's available in these point lights. So people are making these matches of voice to face based on the style of articulation. So here's my guess. If you know Mike Tyson, ask him if he'll do this for me. If you got Mike Tyson's voice and you had him say, the football game is over, or please say what this word is, and we made it into a sine wave voice, which would sound even funnier than his regular voice, and then we took his face and we put the points on it and showed that, and then asked people to match the voice to the face, I bet they could do it. Right? It's kind of the pictorial aspects of Mike Tyson or Fran Drescher that kind of seems kind of, not matching the voice. But when it comes to the articulation, it absolutely makes sense. It absolutely matches. Okay, good. One more slide on this and then we'll switch. I wanted to talk, I'm sorry. Yes, I forgot to put this up. So what I'm saying is what the brain is detecting when it's making these matches that we've been discussing on this slide is the speaker's articulatory style, which is available in the sine wave speech, in those little squeaks, and in the point light, even though in both those cases, there's no attractiveness information, there's no age information, there's no Mike Tyson size information. What's there is the articulatory style, and we believe that's how people are making these matches. Okay. Last slide on audiovisual speech, and then we'll switch real quickly. So here's the deal. The title of this slide is Auditory and Visual Speech Can Share Their Experience. Let me give you the background of this. First of all, you wouldn't be surprised to learn that it would say when you're on a cell phone call, you're more easily able to understand a speaker who you have some experience listening to, right? That doesn't seem too surprising. Right? So if you're talking to a good friend, if you're talking to a family member, you're able to understand through a cell phone connection, even if the cell phone connection isn't great, what they're saying. Okay, that's actually something that can easily be demonstrated in the lab. We hear speech better from talkers who we have some experience with. And actually, in our experience listening to somebody will allow you to hear them better than somebody who you haven't listened to. So it's not like you need a family member that you've been with forever or a friend that you've been with for 10 years or something like that. Even an hour of practice. So my voice, no question, you can understand my voice now, say if there's a noisy background to it, than you can another professor who you haven't had a class with yet, right? There's no question you've had enough experience with that. But that's not only true with hearing voices or hearing speakers, it's also true with lip reading. Now, we know we're not great lip readers when it comes to just silently, seeing a silent face. So, when you're watching the news and you can see the face of the newscaster and you turn off the sound, it's tough. We know that. And it's better for, deaf individuals and women and all that stuff. But You hopefully now know that you are using visual speech information. So we brought subjects into the lab and asked them to try their best with these sentences. And you heard some of the sentences. The football game is over. Please say what this word is. The flowers are on the table. Very simple sentences. And just they concentrated as hard as they could. And they were able to get, I don't know, a third to about half of the words sometimes. You know, some people were better than others. All of these people were not, you know, they were all normal hearing individuals. But what we found is that if we tested them and used the same speaker again and again, they got better. If we, though, decided to switch the speakers, they did not get better, okay? So lip reading, like listening, lip reading from a talker with whom you have some experience is better, even if you're not a great lip reader. Okay, cool, that's kind of interesting, right? But here's the really interesting thing, okay? The experience you get from either listening or lip reading can be shared with the other sensory modality, with the other thing. So for example, this experience can be shared. We asked people to do their best lip reading from a single talker, okay? Imagine lip reading for me for an hour, okay? So football game is okay. So, and you wouldn't do great, but you do your best. And you actually would get better as time went on during that hour, okay? Because you're getting used to the person, okay? So you lip read them. And then what we do is we turn off, we turn off the monitor, the computer monitor, and have them put on headphones and now listen to a speaker whose voice is kind of behind noise, like that. So it's gonna be challenging. And we either play them the voice of the person they just lip read from, or we play them somebody new. And the question is, whose voice are they going to be able to understand better? Okay, which person's speech are they going to understand better? And as it turns out, they will understand the person who they just lip read from. So first they lip read, and then we turn off the monitor and okay, well, this is just showing them, but it's all done with auditory speech. And we either play them the speech of the same talker they just lip read from, all auditory, they're not seeing anything, or the different talker, a new talker relative to the one they just lip read from. And they are better at lip reading from the, at hearing the speech of the person they just lip read from, which means that the experience our subjects gained from lip reading was transferred to hearing, okay? And I can tell you right now, because you're probably anticipating it, you're probably thinking of the question, does it work the other way? Yep, absolutely. Listening to somebody for an hour, okay, and we make it challenging. We put their voice, you know, against a background of noise, like that. And we have them do their best for deciphering the sentences, even though it is challenging. It's auditory speech, but it's still challenging. And then we ask them to lip read from one of two faces, either the same face from the talker they just heard, or a different face from the talker they just heard, and it's absolutely the same sort of transfer of experience. Okay, your experience with hearing a talker can transfer so that you can lip read them better later on. And I think what's going on here is the brain is, again, learning something about the kind of style, the articulatory style, the idiosyncratic way a talker strings together consonants and vowels. That's really just their way of doing it. And they learn that whether they're first learning it from lip reading or first learning it from auditory speech, from listening. And then since they know the articulatory style, it can transfer and help them with doing it in the other sensory modality, okay? So the speech brain cares about articulation in an important way, doesn't care which sensory modality it's getting it from, right? And I think that's cool that it works with speech. You know, we were always very excited about that sort of finding, but I think there's a bigger lesson here because I think this is something the brain is doing all the time. Again, this notion that there's a part of the brain that just does sight, a part of the brain that just does hearing, that just does touch, I think is old, even though this still kind of labels it like that. I think this little, for example, this little speech part of the brain wants information about what a speaker is doing with their articulators and how they're doing it in a way that's specific to them. And we'll get it from hearing speech, seeing speech, or maybe even touching speech, which is pretty darn cool. Okay, time for a little break. Let's see if there's any questions, and then we'll do a polling question and finish up. All right. Okay, some people tried just to guess. That's good. Some people did pretty well. That's fine. You tried to guess which of the talkers it was. And again, it's hard. It's not like people get them all right, but they do get them right at better than chance levels. They are able to do the task. Thank you for chiming in there, folks. Okay, let's do our polling question then. And if another question comes up, feel free to ask. But we will do a question on the McGurk effect, your favorite. Okay. Once you see me on the beach, it's going to be your favorite. The McGurk effect, A, is consistent with evidence that the brain responds as if it hears lip-read speech. Okay, is that true? B, works with pre-linguistic infants. C, works in all languages. Or D, all of the above. And there you go. This will be a question on the third exam. Okay, I'm just going to shift things around here as we're doing this. Get the other lecture ready to go. Okay. You're doing so good. I'm going to end the poll early. Cool. You are nearly all correct. 94% of you got the correct answer, all of the above. It absolutely is consistent with the idea that the brain responds as if it hears lip-read speech, because again, that little part of the brain there, can't believe I've been using this all quarter. That little part of the brain there that is responding to sound actually responds to seeing a face articulate as well. So that's absolutely true. It does work with pre-linguistic infants. Look in the book. There's a lot of description of cute babies there, and it will give you the details of that, but I did say it on that slide. And it does work with all the world's languages it's ever been tested with. Again, the syllables with which it works can be different depending on the language, but it does work. Okay, terrific. I will stop sharing. And it looks like there is one more question. Cool. Batul asks, you know how the paintbrush kind of became like an extension of the hand? Absolutely. I noticed that with my glasses, I've been wearing my glasses very often because of the screen time. And when I don't touch my face like I have it's like I have glasses on. So in other words, you kind of go to rub your eye. Yeah, that's really funny. Yeah, I think things that we wear all the time, you know, watches, jewelry, rings, right? I think that there's a way in which our body kind of adopts them through the way our touch brain is mapped. I think that's absolutely true. Thanks for that, Batul. I appreciate that example. Okay, then let's go to this last topic, and we have some time. It is exactly what we're talking about. We're just going to make it more general. Okay. And I'm calling this the primacy of multisensory perception. It just means that what I'm arguing here is that, again, despite what we used to think about the brain kind of being divided up based on the seeing and hearing and touching and all that sort of stuff, we need to think about it as each of those areas being open to multiple senses. That's what I mean by this is the primary mode of operation. The brain has been designed around multisensory input, and that needs to be considered. And I should just tell you, this is, you know, what this might go a little beyond the class here, but it could be that it's not like the occipital lobe, that visual area in the back, okay, is responsible just for seeing. We know it's not. In fact, it responds to touch and hearing as well to some degree. But we might have thought it was the visual area, because what this area is really good at is spatial layout, right? And spatial layout, like where things are in the room, where things are in space, is something that we often do with our visual system. But now you know we can do this with sound as well when it comes to echolocation. We can do it with touch as well. So it might be time to start kind of rethinking this area, not as the visual area, but as the kind of spatial layout perception area, our way of perceiving how things are laid out in space, that type of thing. And I think that's absolutely true with what's going on here with the speech area. It's not that that speech area is receptive just to sound. We now know it's receptive to all types of information that can convey something about what the talker is doing with their mouth, with their articulators. So it's kind of the name of like the visual areas, the auditory areas, I think that it might be time to rethink that. Okay. What else? So I guess we've said this already, that in some ways these areas of the brain kind of treat the input the same, even if it's not the primary type of input we use. Typically, we do want to get sound for speech perception, but hey, that's okay if we don't have sound, or even if we have sound and we have other things available. The speech brain's going, come on, the water's fine. Everyone can help out. Everyone can help perceiving. I just want to know what that person's articulating. I don't care where it's coming from. Okay, all that stuff. And I think there's a lot of evidence for this. And as we've been discussing, the brain's organization is a good piece of evidence of this. Just meaning that the speech part of the brain, even though it's in the auditory area, okay, is in fact sensitive to vision and touch as well. What else? Well, you guys know this really well, plasticity, right? You know that that the brain areas can kind of shift around if there's a sensory loss, but even maybe more striking than that, a very short sensory loss. Maybe when we talked about being blindfolded for 3 hours or something like that, all of a sudden your visual brain area starts becoming very sensitive to touch. Remember that? So that plasticity is something saying, it's like saying, yep, you're absolutely right. The brain is, all these areas are ready to do other sensory work, or can integrate all the senses at all the times. That's true. Development, which I'll talk about in a second. There's some questions about whether when infants are very young, they actually have a conception through which sense modality the information is coming. And then I'm going to show you some other kind of illusions that I think you'll enjoy that really suggest the kind of the importance of multisensory perception. Okay, I'm going to take this next line out. Implications for perceptual information. It's in the book, but I'm not going to hold you responsible for it. I don't have time to talk about it, and it's a little complex, but if you're interested in this sort of stuff, it's a cool story in the book. Okay, but let's talk about, this stuff first. So what I've been talking about, hold on just a second. I don't have a slide for this. Okay, I think it's related though. I don't have the note slide. What we do know is that there is what we call early and widespread sensitivity to multisensory input. And it's exactly what I've been saying over and over again, that this part here we used to think was dedicated to sound, but now we know it's sensitive to light. This part back here we used to think was dedicated to sight, but now we know it's sensitive to touch, and it's sensitive to sound as well, depending on the plasticity situation. So that's absolutely true. And this is, again, I'm just repeating myself here. Sites we once thought were sensory specific are now, we know, are truly activated by cross-sensory input. And if you're a brain fan, what you're looking at here, is what we used to think of the brain as being divided up into separate areas, and now actually what's this? These are showing the multisensory areas, the dark patches here, the way we used to think about it. Now we know these little multisensory areas are all over the brain. Actually, it's much more full. This was done about 10 years ago. We now know these little dark areas are all over the brain. But we know, as you've learned, that auditory brain areas are modulated by visual speech. We just talked about that. Audition, hearing influences visual brain areas. We talked about that too, especially if somebody's blind, right? And vice versa if somebody's deaf, right? So, we talked about the fact that if somebody is born deaf, especially, their auditory areas become sensitive to movement. But even without, those sort of sensory deficits, you do see this type of thing often, okay? And then we know touch is a big one. We spent a lot of time in touch talking about cross-sensory plasticity. The visual brain is sensitive to touch, the auditory brain is sensitive to touch. That can be easily shifted around and all that sort of stuff. I mean, this is really a very well-known thing by now. and cross-sensory plasticity as an example. Now, I did want to just mention this. Eesh, I got 10 minutes. You know, I think I'm going to have to skip this. Yeah, I'm going to skip this cochlear implant problem. Let me just go to, you know, let me see here. Sorry about this. I kind of wanted to make sure. Yeah, I can talk about this. So here's the thing. What the developmental means, developmental issues, is that infants are very, very sensitive to this multisensory correspondence. It seems, I mean, we have to be very careful when we say big things like this, but it seems that infants are born with being able to at least know correspondences between the senses. And there's a lot of research showing this. So, you know, we're talking about really young infants now. We're talking about, you know, a couple of weeks old, that sort of thing. And we know that, you know, if you play the sound of a bouncing ball through a loudspeaker, and then you show a bouncing ball on one screen that's synchronous with the sound, and you show a bouncing ball on another screen that's asynchronous, okay, so the one on the left is the one that looks like it's making the sound, they will look longer at the one that's correlated, the one that is actually corresponding with the sound. And that's true of other things like location and synchrony. Certainly speech, we've talked about that before. Infants as early as they can be tested seem to be sensitive to these correspondences, okay? Okay, I'm gonna skip this next point. It's called primitive unity hypothesis. I will not ask you at the test on that. Instead, I'm gonna go to these fun demonstrations with adults, okay? So what I'm gonna show you now are the sort of illusions that are kind of like the McGurk effect, where one sensory modality influences another sensory modality. And there's tons of these. I'm going to show you just some of the most fun ones now. There are especially audiovisual ones. Those are the ones that are easy to kind of create the stimuli for and to do in the laboratory, but there's also ones having to do with touch that you might be interested in reading about in the book. But things like where an object is coming from. So the reason I have this ventriloquist up here is because this is a great example of this. You know, ventriloquism used to be a bigger part of my childhood. I don't think it's a very big part of your childhood. Hopefully you didn't have a lot of ventriloquists at your birthday parties, but we did. And the idea is here's somebody talking, here's a puppet talking, and the person's not moving their lips. So it seems like, it really does seem like the sound's coming out of the doll's mouth. And that happens all the time, right? You don't need this kind of silly example for it. When you're watching television and with a surround sound system, even though the voices might be coming out of the speakers that are on the side of your room, because you see a person speaking in the front of the room, it seems like the sound is located there. Very, very well-known effect, but there's other effects like this as well. Let me show you one right now. You're gonna see a dot, and it's going to blink a certain number of times. And I want you to tell me how many times is it blinking. It's going to be, you know, either 1, 2, or 3. How many times is this dot blinking? Here we go. Okay, one more time. Hopefully they were synchronous. I know this is Zoom. To me, right here, it seems like it is just blinking once. Let me do it one more time. Yeah, I'm seeing that dot blink once. But here's the same dot, but paired with a different sound. Okay, how many times is it blinking now? I see it blinking twice. And this is a very, very well-known effect, where instead of like the McGurk effect, where vision influences hearing, in this case, hearing, 1 beep or 2 beeps, influences vision. Okay, so that's like the number of events is actually affected across the sensory modalities. Here's another kind of fun example. Oh, I already did this. Fine. Here's another example. You're going to see 2 balls kind of coming towards each other, and I want you to tell me, does it look like they're passing through each other, or does it look like they're bouncing off each other? Looks like they pass through there. But there, kind of looks like it's bouncing off, doesn't it? It's the exact same video, but the sound makes it seem like something different is happening. Hopefully the sound and sight are synchronous, so when they come close, you're hearing it, okay, doing that. It's a very well-known effect. Again, in this case, we have sound influencing sight. Okay, there's tons of examples. Of course, one of the most kind of fun examples of this is this type of thing.
A roller coaster. Sweetie, they won't kill you in an amusement park as long as you have a dime left in your pocket. There's nothing you can do. You sound like my doctor. Not only are you not killing them, I'm having fun. They said to stay safe. No, that's a load of...
Ah!
I always get sick flying backwards. Hey, I can see a car.
Okay, I assume you folks all know this type of thing. This is a motion simulator ride, right? This is The Simpsons. Somebody told me The Simpsons isn't there at Universal Studios anymore, which is a bummer because I loved it. I mean, not only I think the graphics are done really well, but I think it's very, very funny. Hopefully there's one as funny if they did replace it. But anyway, here we have a situation now. We're not really talking about sound and sight affecting each other, but here's a situation where sight is affecting something else. It's really affecting our sense of balance, which we really haven't talked very much about here, but it's kind of affecting our sense of touch as well here. These are, these motion simulator rides that we know are very, very effective. Go in the book and you'll see this great interview, really fun interview with the folks who designed some of these motion simulator rides. They didn't design the Simpsons ride, or they don't design Universal Studios. They design ones that are in Vegas, kind of some of the smaller ones, but they are so effective. I mean, especially if it's taking up most of what you can see, you feel on that like you're falling down a roller coaster. And what's going on here is the visual system is influencing your sense of balance. And we know that this works really, really well. And there's tons of research to show that you can use motion simulation either from a film or like we used to do it in the old days. I used to have one of these down in the basement of the old psychology building. We actually build a room that we put on rollers, or I guess this one's on gliders, and move it back and forth around a person, and they start switching their balance. And that's what this is measuring here. They start kind of, without even knowing it, they do feel like they're moving, absolutely, but they actually move back and forth in very subtle ways, but in ways that are completely coordinated with the visible motion of the room. Not only does it work visually, it also works auditorily. This is an example. I won't get into the details, but you can induce this kind of illusory motion where people start kind of shifting their balance a little bit and have an experience of their own motion while they're blindfolded, but sounds are moving around them. It has to be kind of the right type of sounds. They have to kind of feel like, that they're in a space where the sound's moving around them, but it does work as well. And then get this, this will be one of the last things we'll discuss. You can induce, going back to visual motion, you can induce this sort of experience of kind of coordinating your system so your balance changes just by looking at something close and then focusing it on something close and then focusing on something far away. So that little of a change of the visual information actually induces a recoordination of the body. Okay, so visual fixation influences posture. I'm going to put this slide up. I'll go through it quickly. Let me put the whole thing up, and I'll just go through it quickly. You'll certainly have access to it. It will be on the video. This is just a conclusion of the whole class. You are perceiving much more than you realize, right? Whether it's unconscious, subconscious, or implicit perception, this is happening all the time. Cool, very cool that these skills can actually be enhanced with perceptual expertise. And this expertise, this kind of change in the way you're using these hidden senses is a great thing to demonstrate this plasticity we talked about in some detail. Many of these skills, they show that you can perceive properties of the world in ways that we don't think of being sensitive to these properties, like being able to use sound for space through echolocation and things like that. You hear space there, you see speech, you recognize other people not just from seeing them or hearing their voice, but through touch and smell, right? And I think what this demonstrates and what we've been talking about is the primacy of this multimodal perception as we've been discussing it. And then we discussed the fact that you are particularly sensitive to human actions. I mean, that's something that you seem very sensitive to. And, you know, face and body movements, visual speech and all that sort of stuff. And some of the way that we achieve that sensitivity, it would seem, is through this kind of, you know, kind of very deep imitation that our brains are always doing, at least, if not our muscles and our bodies and our voices and that sort of thing. So that's how we kind of combine some of these kind of big concepts in the field of neuroscience and perceptual psychology with all these kind of cool things that hopefully you learn that you are doing in some ways all the time. Okay, good luck on your exam. And
Professor, I had a quick question.
Okay.
Actually, can you look at our screens real quick?
Look at your screens? Sure. Let me do that. There you are. Okay, let me look at everyone's screen then. Yes. Oh my gosh. Oh, that is beautiful. You're making me cry. I'm getting verklempt. Thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. I look forward to meeting you in the fall. Thanks, everybody. Take care. It's beautiful.